Well, Kirby, it is so great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I grew up many decades ago, Kirby, and as a young man, I learned how to type on a typewriter. I used a fax machine and I used a very early version of a personal computer. So I had the luxury of kind of more analog. And this is, by the way, I didn't even have a digital clock as a young man. But the world has shifted and everyone carries a phone, especially younger kids.
Yep.
How does today's world impact the ability of children to get the most important life skills like reading a clock?
Well, I think just the fact that there's so much digital technology out there, like you said, phones, and those phones that we carry around perform so many of the functions that we used to have different tools for. I mean, you think on your phone, you get your news, you get your weather, that's where you have your calendar. It's how we communicate with people. It's our clock, not just an alarm clock, but a timer. So yeah, it is. It's a lot different. My upbringing sounds very similar to yours, where it seems like everything we had to do required kind of a different skill set, a different set of tools. And now it just seems like we have more and more digital tools that do things for us. I don't have to carry around a day planner and continually check it to make sure when I have meetings because now my phone is just pushing out reminders when I have meetings. So yeah, like my own kids, the world they've grown up in is a lot different, just because technology that's being developed, especially that's on their phones, is doing a lot of stuff for them. So.
How does this shape? Is there concern that kids today, I just actually saw my niece and nephew who are younger. They're in their, I
Mhm.
think they're 9 and 13 or 10 and 13 respectively. Their life is in the digital world, but they go to school and they'll probably go to university. But are they are there skills that these children, our children, don't no longer have that we need to add back to the curriculum in schools like college and high school and junior high school?
You know, uh, Personally, I think there are some things that we should put back into the curriculum. I used to be a fourth grade teacher. That was my first job out of college. I was a school teacher for quite a long time, and one of the things I taught was cursive handwriting. Which now, for the most part, is disappearing from schools. And I know that there are probably some states that want to bring it back. And I just remember for myself when I was writing things by hand, it did kind of like force me to slow down. So my
Hmm.
brain seemed to work differently than when I'm typing. I can type pretty fast, so I can type things, I can delete, I can revise. Whereas, I just remember with cursive writing, I remember having to slow down, and my own students, having to slow down and be thoughtful. I tell them at the very least, you want to think about what you're writing as you're writing it because you probably don't want to have to erase a whole page or a sentence and go back and write it again. Um, and so, uh, you know, I think, with technology, there's a saying that says, with every new innovation, it gives us something new and it takes something away.
Hmm.
And I think that's, something people should ask themselves about new innovations that come along. You know, by and large, I think our society is pretty uncritical when it comes to adopting new technologies. We see things for their efficiency, for their speed, for their ease of use, but we don't always think about what it might be taking away. I remember learning how to use a map, and then eventually learning how to drive. And I didn't have a GPS, so even though I'd grown up in my small hometown, uh, you know, I would sometimes get lost because sitting in the car, I didn't always pay attention to landmarks that I did when I was driving. Well, now, when my own kids learn to drive, sometimes, there are landmarks that they have never really paid attention to. until they finally turn off the GPS because they've just kind of been getting instructions turn by turn and not paying attention to not just names of streets, but landmarks and things that they see. And so I think any new innovation is going to give us some advantage, maybe, whether that's efficiency or speed or ease of use, but it's going to take something away. Whether that's critical thinking, whether that's problem
Yeah.
solving, whether that's being more aware of your surroundings. So yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know what skills maybe need to be reintroduced to school curriculum, but I know that some of the things that have disappeared, even though it seems like maybe they've disappeared because they're obsolete, that means that other habits of mind, other ways of thinking, other ways of seeing the world, those have also disappeared when those skills have not been used in schools.
You brought up critical thinking. It's something that I was immediately thinking of. When
Mhm.
I used to have to write papers. Like I said, I started on a typewriter. Actually, I started in a notebook writing, drafts, and I wrote them, by the way, in cursive. And then I progressed to the typewriter.
Yeah.
Then I moved on to the Apple IIe, or
Yeah.
Apple IIc, as I'm dating
Mhm.
myself. But through that process, my critical thinking evolved, and I still apply that critical thinking. How can we, based on using technology today, how can we kind of bring that back? Because I think that maybe, and you're probably the best person to talk about it between both of us, is I think that that's something that's certainly lacking. What does something really mean? How do you discern the truth from or misinformation from fact?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. There are two things that have happened in the last, we'll say 20 years. It maybe it has been developing longer than that, but it's just this explosion of information. The first was when the internet became something that basically everybody had access to.
Mhm.
Um, there was almost immediately this propensity by people to look something up. At first, with like Yahoo and Ask Jeeves and some of those old search engines, you had to actually know keywords and kind of click links until you found the
Yeah.
thing you were looking for. Google comes along, and all you have to do is type in natural language, and it has a way of kind of finding the thing that you're looking for or approximating what it thinks you're looking for. And almost instantly, people start uh, just using like the first or second result that comes up in their search. I mean, there's all this data to support, that even, in schools, out of schools, wherever it is, that if somebody Googles something, they're likely to go with the first result that comes up.
Yeah.
Like, it used to be on Google at the bottom of the page, you could see all the O's, and those were all the pages that had the search results. But, people didn't really click those, right? Like they would just go with kind of the first couple of uh of results. And it's the same with like now we have generative AI, where it's not you ask it something, and not only does it, it doesn't even just find you a website that gives you the information you want, it just writes it for you.
Yeah.
And so what I think we're going to see is a shift, maybe not among everybody, but I believe you're going to start to see a shift among some schools, some educators, some parents, where they want to put the focus back on the process of thinking through questions. Whether they're developing their own inquiry question or their own research question, or whatever it is that they're writing about. Uh, and you're going to see people becoming intentional about not using some of these tools that just give us the information. Because, I remember kind of like I would write research papers, and I would go into the library, and I would have to look up books and articles, and then I would have to
Yeah.
check those things out and read them and find, to see if it even matches what I'm trying to do. And in the process of that, I was having to be discerning. I was having to continually research and think back on what is the point of this paper that I'm writing? What is my thesis statement? What's my hypothesis? Is this research that I'm finding supporting that? And so I was continually kind of doing this cyclical way of thinking, where I was, you know, thinking about the argument I wanted to build and whether or not the stuff I was finding was evidence. And now, the technology just gives us the information, and it's authoritative enough that in many cases people don't even question whether it's true or accurate or not because it sounds good. And they think, well, this sounds pretty good to me. And so, honestly, I think that's a major outcome of education that could be at risk if schools are not intentional about focusing on the process of thinking, the process of doing research and finding evidence versus just letting the technology that's out there write the answers for them.
Two words, card catalog. That's how that I remember
Oh,
the card catalog. Remember you would look it up
oh
and you would
yeah,
try to sort through. Let me ask you, I could talk to you and we'll bring you back, but I want to
yeah,
ask you about kind of finding our way back because we need, I think that in successive generations, we're always seeing them get that better. They're stronger, they're taller, they're bigger. Hopefully, they're
yeah.
healthier, right? I mean, but this is an area of, in my mind, deficiency. How do we? Who will lead this way back? Is it the parents? Us back? Is it the
Hmm.
parents? Is it the educators? Is it the policymakers? Is it a combination of all three? How do we work our way back to getting that level of critical thinking so that not only are you stronger and better as a human being, but also you're a major contributor to the future of human society. That's kind of
Yeah.
that's kind of very philosophical and high level. I didn't mean it sound that way, but in your mind,
No,
how do we find our way back?
you know, that that's a great question. I think if I had a authoritative answer, there would be a lot of people that that would want to know where I got that information. Is my opinion, as someone who has raised kids and been a teacher, that I think where we find our way back is in families with parents who are intentional about certain things, with teachers who are intentional about certain things. I know that there's a lot of, at least in the state where I live in, there's a lot of kind of top-down education policy
Mhm.
being discussed right now. But the truth is, the thing that is the most impactful is what the teacher does. And so teachers, I think, can be intentional about helping kids kind of find their way back to some of those baseline skills that may disappear, and families can as well.
Yeah.
I my two boys were involved in scouts, and this is not a commercial for Scouting America, but they gained a lot from it because it is very traditional. I mean, there were a lot of opportunities for them to learn some of those things, but that was a choice we had to make. And trust me, along the way, I mean, there was a lot of pushback. They were like, because a lot of their friends didn't do it, or, they had other things they wanted to do. But in the process of doing that, they learned a lot of these kind of older traditional baseline skills that otherwise may have disappeared, like learning how to, orient a map and use a map in the backcountry, or how to cook over a campfire, and how to shop using ingredients, not just shop with buying pre-prepared food and things like that. So, although I know there's a lot of power in policymakers, that states have a lot of power, school districts hold a lot of influence over what happens. I honestly think it's going to be individuals that kind of decide to take up those initiatives on their own, and they have the patience and the motivation, and the conviction to follow through with it.
Yeah, well said. I tend to agree. I think it's going to come from the teachers, the educators, and also the parents that kind of reinforce that. Kirby
Yeah.
Alexander, we're going to have to leave it there. It's so great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing some insight, and we look
Yeah.
forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for watching, and don't forget we're back again tomorrow morning with another great expert and another great topic. You can tune in right here Monday through Sunday at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse, for all the news in one place, delivered directly to your email box. Check it out at our website.